Late April 1982, a lone delta-winged bomber roars down a wet runway at night. This is the Avro Vulcan. Built to deter a nuclear apocalypse, it is about to embark on the longest bombing raid in history. To understand this mission, we must go back to the dawn of the Cold War. In 1947, the British Ministry of Supply issued a revolutionary requirement for a high-altitude, jet-powered bomber capable of carrying a nuclear payload deep into Soviet territory. Designed by the brilliant engineer Roy Chadwick at Avro, the design was highly radical. Rather than using traditional wings, Chadwick gambled on a massive, triangular delta wing. It was a shape that looked less like an airplane and more like an alien spacecraft. Entering service with the RAF in 1956, the Vulcan became the backbone of the British V-bomber fleet. For over 2 decades, these planes stood on 24-hour nuclear alert, ready to launch within minutes if the Soviet Union ever struck. Before the Falklands conflict, the Vulcan was a high-altitude phantom. Its role was pure deterrence. It cruised at 55,000 feet, high above Soviet anti-aircraft fire, relying on its low radar cross-section and advanced electronic jamming to survive. But by 1982, the Vulcan's time had passed. Low-level tactics and modern missiles had made high-altitude bombers vulnerable. The fleet was literally days away from being retired and sold for scrap. Then, the geopolitical landscape fractured. In April 1982, Argentine forces invaded the British-held Falkland Islands. Facing a geographical nightmare, the RAF hatched a desperate plan called Project Black Buck. Use the aging Vulcans to strike the main runway at Port Stanley airfield. There was a massive problem. The Vulcan was an intermediate-range bomber. To survive the 8,000-mile round trip from Ascension Island, they needed air-to-air refueling. RAF engineers rushed to aviation museums and scrap yards to find long-lost refueling probes. To get just one Vulcan to the target and back required an unprecedented logistical nightmare. It took 11 Handley Page Victor tankers flying in a complex aerial daisy chain formation, transferring fuel to each other just to keep the bomber topped up. Flying completely radio silent through violent tropical storms over the Atlantic, the crews endured a grueling 15-hour flight. One mistake during a blind, turbulent nighttime refueling hookup meant dropping into an empty ocean. Approaching the Falklands, Flight Lieutenant Martin Withers dropped the heavy bomber to just 300 feet above the ocean waves. This dangerous maneuver kept the massive delta wing under the radar horizon of Argentine defensive screens. Suddenly, the Vulcan climbed to 10,000 feet. As enemy radar locked on, the crew flipped on their newly rigged electronic jamming pods. Within seconds, 21,000-pound iron bombs dropped from the belly, tearing directly across the Port Stanley runway. The raid achieved a single direct hit on the runway, but its strategic impact was massive. Shocked by the long-range strike, Argentina held back its best supersonic fighter jets near Buenos Aires to protect its own capital, giving British forces naval superiority. Following the war, the Vulcan fleet was quickly phased out of active service by 1984. However, the legendary aircraft lived on for decades as a popular airshow display item, capturing the hearts of millions with its famous Vulcan whale. Today, you can visit these iconic Cold War titans in person. Major models are beautifully preserved at the Royal Air Force Museum Midlands, the Imperial War Museum Duxford, and the Strategic Air Command and Aerospace Museum in the United States. From a nuclear shield that was never meant to fire to an improvised savior in the South Atlantic, the Avro Vulcan remains one of the greatest aviation achievements in human history.